It was a nice sunny day with a little bit of a breeze blowing. So we decided it would be a really good day to go to Borax Lake. So we're going the back roads in. And in Oregon, most all the playas, when this was first set up in pioneer days, were used as highways. So they're still in public ownership. So the big share of the playas you can drive on okay now. One exception, you don't want to drive on the playa when it's wet or with standing water on it, or you'll be stuck. And I mean stuck to where you can't even get another vehicle close enough to pull you out. So much caution should be used on that part. The playas are very smooth and flat, so you can go just as fast as you want. We go across the first playa and we see a little set of eyes sitting there watching us. He thinks we don't see him, but we see him. Even though the sun is starting to beat down quite warm, some of the residents of the desert are peeking out at us, and then we see an eagle's nest on a solar panel. This solar panel is by the BLM, and it's used to generate electricity to run a submersible pump to pump water for the cattle and wildlife. This trough's been running over and it runs to a pond down below. So there's all sorts of wildlife. When you have water in the desert, you have wildlife. This little bird, he should go down and drink out of that pond, I'd think. He's going to end up falling in there. But there's places where they can get out. Even a cattail elected to grow out there. And this eagle, I have to hand it to him. He was a really good engineer to get that nest to stay up there in the winds that hit out here. We see the control panel for the solar panel hanging on a pole. We continue on the road a ways, and in a little bit we come to another puddle of water in a gully. And as we look, we see that it's even serving as habitat for a few water birds that are dipping around out in it and catching little insects. When you have water in the desert, you build it and they will come. And this is a favorite watering hole for wild horses and antelope as well as beef cattle. We continue on down the road and we look ahead and we see another playa ahead. And this playa is the Albert Desert. We're finally going to get there by the back roads. At first, you go through a few bushes, and then when you get out a ways, it opens up into a straight, flat playa, so you can go for miles without having to make a turn or anything out here on the desert. And the Steens Mountains, with just a little bit of snow on the top, are standing tall. We see even a few other people out here working hard at the hard business of having fun. We see where somebody's been out here when it was wet and made some pretty nasty tracks. I hope they didn't get stuck. We buzz across the desert at a decent speed, and we're watching for the spot where we'll get off. It's Frog Springs, and we've used this since the early 80s, but it's changed a whole lot since then. That's about the only legal access to the Albert Desert from the west, and so we'll use it. There is another spot that's built on property from a ranch, but you have to pay to use it, and so we're not willing to pay. We never used to have to. So we watch for the place to get off at Frog Springs, and I think I see it coming up. We see several camps out here where people are camping. There's not always peace and quiet out on the Albert Desert. There's got to be so many people use it, and so you hear the roar of vehicles and see the dust they've kicked up. And also, the parties at night can be fairly intense. That's why we like it where we are. There's none of that goes on because no one knows where it is much. We follow some tracks at a decent speed and head for Frog Springs. That's a really nice spring, and we used to always get our drinking water there when we're camping out on the desert. And it was really good water. It comes out a little bit warm, but you let it set out overnight and it cools to a very decent temperature. You can get your vehicle up there to a decent speed crossing the Albert Desert. The BLM has recently added some signs and made sort of a little camping area up at Frog Springs, and they've even moved an outhouse in. That's all new to us. This is the first time we've seen it just because we've been ignoring the Albert Desert for all these years. But for those that like a little bit of comfort in their camping, this is a decent spot to camp, and you're overlooking the vast expanse of the Albert Desert. And Mickey Butte stands tall in the background. There's a sign off the east slope of the Steens Mountain Road, or the road that goes toward Fields and Andrews. There's a sign that says Frog Spring, and you just go down it, and there it'll be. Next, we're going to Borax Lake. We go down to the little substation 2 miles north of Fields, turn right at the substation like you're going in it, and then you follow a fairly decent little gravel road down till you come to the first turn off to the left. I mean, well traveled turn. Then we go up this little road for a ways, and we see a sign that warns us about the dangers of the hot springs, which you should take seriously. We go on up till we come to a locked gate just ahead of us a few yards, and it says road closed, and the gate's locked, so you can park right there and then walk out the road we used to drive at one time. This was at one time in the early days a borax operation. The old tanks are still here, and they fired the borax with sagebrush that they gathered from around, and they had Chinese workers that they imported from China working in the borax. And anyway, they harvested so much sage in the area that they burned off all the sage that was within reach, and so they had to shut the operation down. But it was a pretty good sized operation, two big tanks that are rusted out now, and they hauled the borax to Winnemucca, where they put it on a railroad train, that they hauled it in 20 mule team wagons from here clear to Winnemucca. We find the big Borax Lake, and this is the spot where these severely endangered chub live. They're called the Borax Lake chub, and they're very small little fish, and they feed around they go out during the night usually when the water's a little cooler and feed around the edge. Then they come up during the daytime and bury in the mud and moss so they can be hidden there. And they're a very small little fish. And if you sneak up to some of the spots behind a clump of grass, you very well will see even a school of them. We look out and see the water boiling up out there where there's some huge hot springs coming up right in the lake. And yet you might be tempted to go swimming out there, but you have to wade through a bunch of ooze to get out there. And then if you were to swim over one of those hot springs while it was erupting, you might get scalded really good. So it's best to find another spot to soak. We take a little 2-track trail that isn't used anymore but has been used due north up toward, you sort of steady on the Steens Mountains and go north. And there we see an entire series of hot springs. And some of them are just a perfect temperature. Others are way too hot to use. And they would be extremely dangerous. If you got in one of these little guys and it started erupting, you would be in a world of hurt. So we just walk along and watch some of them as we go, using much caution. Marge is going to check the temperature on this one, and she checks it and says, wow, that one's way too hot to use. And so we'll move on up. There's enough of these little pools. There's so many that I never have been able to really get a count on them, but they're really pretty little pools and shouldn't be ignored when you go up there. The only thing I would be really reluctant about using some of them for bathing, just in the event they might erupt while you were in it. And some of them are so deep that you might have some trouble getting out of some of them. But Marge is going to check the temperature of them as we go with a gentle breeze blowing. We just continue up this little road for uh, for maybe about a half mile, maybe not quite that, seeing more pools. With some of them, there's algae will grow in that super hot water. Matter of fact, that's where they got their algae. They needed algae for the DNA tests, and they looked all over for algae that would withstand hot water, and they found it in the hot springs. Some of them have a lot of mineral, and you can see the deposits around the edge. This mineral that deposits there is called travertine. So there's a little travertine ridge around each of the pools as we move on north, with the beautiful sky reflecting in the pools. Nature is the best sculpture of all. You can see a little ridge sculptured around here with its little wavy texture of hot springs minerals. That when this hot water hits some of the limestone and minerals down below, it's hot enough it dissolves them. But as soon as it gets up and hits the cooler air, then it'll be deposited around the edge of the pools. So each of these pools looked as if an artist had sculptured them, although there's no artist that good. And this one even has a little underwater bridge in it. What a beauty, with the sky shimmering in the background. I think this place is owned by the Nature Conservancy, which is taking care of it and trying to preserve it for future generations to walk through and enjoy, plus its historical significance being a borax mine. We go over the fence over a little rickety ladder and find a few more pools, but no more than 200 or 300 yards after we get through the fence, we see some pools that we've always used for soaking. This pool looks like it's probably really hot, but there they are, the two pools that we like to use, and they're quite big. They're big enough to swim in. The only thing, they're so terribly deep that you basically have to hang on to the side. I got in this one and I was able to stand on my tiptoes and have my head sticking out right at the edge. It just drops straight off. And there's a hole in here. Looks like you could see the center of the earth. That's probably where it erupts from. So I'm going to be a little cautious not to get over that hole. And if you fell in there and weren't a good swimmer, you'd be in a world of hurt. So I'm going to go on up and very carefully get in the upper pool. Some days this pool can be too hot, and other days it's just perfect, and some days it can be too cool. But there's a second pool that sort of takes the runoff from this one, and usually always you can use it if this one is too hot. And it might be a bit safer. I don't think it has as many hot springs erupting under it as this one does. But I'll just carefully feel my way down into the pool, hanging on the travertine deposits around the edge. And it looks like I've finally touched the bottom with my tiptoes. So I can do some swimming and soaking and really enjoy this water. And the water feels just super good right here. You shouldn't drink any of this water because it has a lot of things in it like mercury and arsenic that's more than you should drink. And I'm not sure about soaking in it, whether enough of it soaks through your skin to bother you or not. But anyway, where we just use it occasionally, probably we're in pretty good shape. We get done soaking and go back over the ladder that takes us over the fence. You could crawl through the fence. And Marge wanted to have a milkshake at Fields. They're known throughout the world as the best milkshake you can get any place. So she'll go in and get a milkshake. They're too big for one person. So she gets one milkshake and 2 cups. And that was plenty, although they're quite spendy. Then on the way back, we stop. We're coming back a different way, and we stop at the hot springs on Willow Creek, and you can see the bubbles working up where the water slowly percolates up through the rest of the water to keep the pool nice and warm. And then there's a second pool where the runoff goes that's larger, and so that one's cooler. Marge likes to use the cooler one, but I kind of like to start in the hotter one and then move to the cooler one. We go back to our camp just in time to be there for the time of the wonderful, wonderful sunset over the Steens Mountains. And the next day, it's time to head for home. We see a cattle drive as you do. This is cattle country. And so you'll see cattle drives. Everyone has to participate, from the young kids to the old man and even the dog. And they're riding some pretty horses, and the cows are bawling as they're heading down the road to the ranch.